Jai Baba. This is the 14th and final session in our God Speaks series. God Speaks as the master framework for Mihir Baba's Darshana. Up until now, we've covered the entirety of God Speaks through its first 9 parts or chapters, and today we'll talk about the 10th of them. The title, which I've given to this particular session, as you can see on this slide, is What's Love Got to Do with It? Mihir Baba's retraction in part 10 and the absence of the love theme in God Speaks. And this is the little write-up that I did. In most of his teachings to the world, Mihir Baba gave overwhelming priority to the theme of love. Yet, God Speaks has almost nothing to say on this subject. Why not? Can love be fitted into the divine theme narrative in God Speaks? Indeed, what place can or should God Speaks itself occupy in the life of his lovers? How should we situate this book in our understanding of him? And how does the account which it provides relate to that of some of the other great world religious and cosmological systems? So a central paradox we'll be looking at is this. God Speaks is widely regarded as Mihir Baba's most important book. I feel so for my own part. And yet, it has almost nothing to say on the subject of love. But if you look at Baba's messages otherwise, love is overwhelmingly the dominant theme. What happened? Why did it get left out of God Speaks? The 10th chapter, part 10 of God Speaks, does, in a way, speak to this point. It doesn't talk about love, but it talks about a related topic. So where we'll be getting to in this session is to part 10 of God Speaks, the last chapter, which is less than a page long. It's only about half a page long. But before that, there are some other features of God Speaks I'd like to look at. After part 10, God Speaks has a supplement that begins on, I forget, page 193 or so. And if you count the index, runs all the way to 310 or 313 or so. So it's 120 pages of supplement. Now, this supplement itself is so rich and complex that to cover it properly would take 5 sessions all by itself. And I don't think I'll be doing that for the present. But I do want to say a little bit about it. And the main part of it is a whole series of short, selected items on different topics, selected by the 2 editors of the book, Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens. But it also has some other things. It has, for example, a glossary. And there's a chart 11 we've looked at once or twice. So I want to say something about these things before we go to chapter 10. Now, the history of the supplement is this. Baba started giving dictations before the New Life in 1947. I talked about this in an earlier session. He wanted a book to be written by Dr. Abdul Ghani, and Ghani took down extensive notes, but he didn't get the book done. And then Baba left everything on the New Life, and during the New Life, Ghani died. After Baba came back from the New Life, he looked at what Ghani had written, and Baba was quite dissatisfied with it. It did not contain what he wanted Ghani to be talking about. So he started all over dictating afresh with Erich Jesawala. And the book God Speaks as We Have It results from those dictations, which Baba gave in, Satara and Mahabaleshwar, 1953-54. But when he sent the manuscript to Ivy Deuce and Don Stevens, the editors who wound up getting it published by Dodd Mead, Baba gave them, he also sent Ghani's complete manuscript and said, read through it, and if you find anything of value that you think would be worth including, do so. And they did. I think Ivy Deuce was the one who worked on this part of the project. And the supplement, most of the supplement is the result of that, taking selections from what Dr. Ghani had written. I just wanted to show you once again in these slides some of what Dr. Ghani's manuscript looks like. I showed this in the previous session. It's some of Dr. Ghani's write-ups for the chapter, The 10 States of God. That happens to be what I have in form, a PowerPoint form. There are many other chapters too, but let me just scroll through and you can see a little bit of what it looks like. Typed up, there are at various, some of it's handwritten like this. Let me get to where you'll see a bunch of charts. Yeah, here's a chart, for example. It's crossed out, but at the bottom there's a chart. There are some more charts. So Dr. Ghani wrote about 275 type pages roughly, something like that. And the supplement mostly consists of extracts, and these have been linked to the primary text by endnotes. For example, you'll be reading through the main text of God Speaks, and you'll see a superscript, number 14. And then if you go to the back of the book, you'll see a selection on a particular topic that has been taken from what Dr. Ghani wrote. Now, I myself had been a little bit skeptical of this for a long time because I happened to know, I mean, there are certain parts of it that, parts of the supplement that I know were actually from various books of Baba's. For example, this one right here, number 14, here it is. You can see it's called The Divine Theme. And, well, that's actually the text of a book that was published in the 1940s. So I was wondering, well, why is it that they're attributing this to Dr. Ghani? Well, finally, a few years ago at the Avatar Mihir Baba Trust Archives, we found Dr. Ghani's manuscript. And yes, indeed, it does include all of this, including the entire text of the Divine Theme and everything else. There remain a bunch of questions about the supplement that further research is going to have to answer at some point. One of these, a big one, is with each particular element, who wrote it? You can't assume Dr. Ghani wrote it because in this case, the Divine Theme, it's by Mihir Baba. He was the author of this particular piece of text. Whereas there are other items in the supplement that were definitely by Dr. Ghani. For example, this one here. Yeah, number 34, Tawhid, or the Unitary State of God. It's about 11 or 12 pages long. Well, this is by Dr. Ghani, and they're not identified at the beginning. Like number 34, you'd see a endnote superscript 34 in the text much earlier, and you'd come here. But you're not told who wrote it. So at some point, all of this is going to have to get identified. Also, a lot of the elements in here, Dr. Ghani took from different places. Ghani had been the editor of the monthly magazine, the Mihir Baba Journal, for several years. It was published 1938 to 1942. And at first, Elizabeth Patterson edited it, but she left to go back to America, and then Dr. Ghani did. So he had a wide range of material at his disposal, and he incorporated a lot of it into his manuscript. So when you read the supplement, there's no real way of knowing exactly who wrote the particular items in it. So there's going to have to be work done on that so people know what it is that they're reading. Still, when all of this had been compiled by the editors, Ivy Deuce and Dunn Stevens, they sent it to Baba for his approval. And the book basically included the main text of God Speaks, which we've been looking at until now. And it included this extensive supplement also, as they had selected content from Dr. Ghani's manuscript. And Baba approved it. So all of this comes with Mihir Baba's approval. The content of this supplement is extremely diverse and varied. There's a lot of really interesting material in it. Here is a table of contents at the start of the supplement: impressioned consciousness, practical mysticism, etc. You can see there are 37 different separate items. This is in the second edition. There were fewer in the first edition, but then more got added. So it covers all sorts of different topics. This is a point of interest. Baba did request in 1956 that the second edition of God Speaks contain a particular message. And it's this message here on this slide. Existence is substance, and life is shadow. This is a part of number 36. And Baba did ask that this be included in the supplement. In fact, he asked that it be put at the very end of the book to seal, as a seal on the book, so to speak. And I've always wondered why they didn't do that. It's actually a bit buried. You can see it's just, there's spiritual paradox, and then there's this one, and it goes on a couple pages, and then there's another message, the Four Journeys, which you can also find in the book, The Everything and the Nothing, and there's another last item after that. So I wonder why they didn't put it at the very end, but in any case, it's worth being aware of that particular message. That's one that Baba, I think, dictated after the first edition. I'm not sure when he dictated it, to tell the truth, but he specifically asked for it to be included in the second edition. Just a couple of items, topics that are of interest in the supplement. The early numbers, like 3, as you can see here, 3 through 8 or so, gives little tidbits on the planes of consciousness, including quotations from the poetry of Hafez, where Baba is quoting couplets that he says pertain specifically to these different planes. In numbers 9 through 12 or so, starting here. Oops, I'm sorry. Okay, in 9 through 12 or so, no, it's not 9, it's 10. Yeah, here we, no, 11. Baba gives explanations on the different varieties of miracles and what their differences are, what kinds of powers exhibit themselves on different levels. So in number 11, you can see the miracles of a savior or the avatar. versus the miracles of a perfect master, a Sadguru, a pure wali on the sixth or fifth plane, on the lower planes, fourth, third, second, and first planes. And he says more about that in the next section. Kinds of powers. Here Baba explains about the divine powers of the fourth plane. On the fourth plane, you actually have God's own powers. You can create universes teeming with life. Then he talks about occult powers on the first three planes. And he says a little bit about basically tantric powers. It's possible to cultivate certain kinds of occult powers without even being on the planes at all. So this is one of the most extensive treatments of this topic that you can find anywhere. In 13 and 14, Baba gives a whole presentation on the topic of meditation. As I mentioned, number 14 here is actually a reproduction of what was a booklet called The Divine Theme. And it was given as a meditation for people to use. It has charts in it to be used as a basis for meditation. And those charts got reproduced. Like here's one of them, and here's another chart. So this was published in 1943, but the content got reproduced here. In numbers 20 to 21 in the supplement, I'm just trying to give a little bit of the flavor of some of what you'll find here. Baba goes into these Sufi concepts of fana and fanafila here and baka. We talked about this 2 sessions back. So this is a lot more really useful information about these Sufi terms. This one, that was fana and fanafila, and this one here is fana and baka. Now this kind of content seems quite obviously to have been written by Dr. Ghani. And a few numbers on, number 27 here, as you can see, Ghani again has brought together various quotations on another important pair of Sufi terms, hal and mukam. Hal is a state, an intoxication that you experience on the path. Baba sometimes would use the Hindu word bhav to express the same thought. And maqam is a station that you achieve on the path to God. After God realization, hal is finished. You have no more experience because you're God realized. But God realized people will establish themselves in certain stations. So they do have maqams. So these are big Sufi concepts. And let me just pitch this in here. When it comes to ontology and metaphysics, it seems to me that Baba has a closer affiliation with Vedanta, because it's really in Vedanta that you get explained that the soul is one with God and God is the only reality. It was harder to say that in these monotheistic religions. But where Sufism really has a lot to offer, one of the areas is in a language for talking about the path and the experiences of the path. Now, it so happens the God Speaks doesn't talk about that a whole lot, but it does somewhat. And so here are some of the sections in the supplement that go into that. Now, also, there are some very significant sections in the supplement. Here's one of them, number 28, and the next few sections after this on the avatar. And we looked at some of Baba's discussion of the avatar at the end of the 9th chapter. The last 4 pages are on this. But there's really very significant content here. Here, this number 30 is the avatar and the Sadguru. Baba also gives a very useful presentation on the different kinds of mukti, the different kinds of God realization. Here's a little table, 25. These 2 items in the supplement, 24 and 25, give information about the different kinds of Shivatmas, or the different kinds of God-realized individuals who there are. It's very useful and convenient. 4 types of mukti, or liberation. Thus you have ordinary mukti, vidya mukti, jivan mukti, and param mukti. And on number 25, there's a table that conveniently summarizes these. So an ordinary mukti is the experience of infinite bliss without infinite power or infinite knowledge. Many people they just bliss out and then they're gone. Vida Mukti, in Vida Mukti, you have the I am God experience with infinite knowledge, power, bliss, all 3 of those, but no creation consciousness. Jivan Mukti, you have the I am God experience of knowledge, power, bliss, and you're also conscious of creation, but you have no job or duty therein. And Param Mukti, you have I am God experience, you have knowledge of creation, and you have duty. So Param Mukti would be the kind of mukti experienced by perfect masters. So this is a very convenient summary of all of this. And at the very back of the book, after the end of the these 37 items, in this table here, Baba gives another summary of this. God realization by man. So you can see there he gives the terms, the status, the state, the stage or aspect, and the gnosis. For, this is a majub, this is someone in the divine junction, this is, Jivan Mukta, and so forth. It gives a lot of the technical vocabulary, English, Arabic, Islamic, Vedantic, for all of these. I'm just trying to give an idea of some of the riches to be found here if you want to study these things more deeply. Baba gives information about the spiritual hierarchy in item number 32. It's this one here. This is something a lot of people might be interested in. He says that in each cycle of time, which ranges from 7 to 1400 years, there are 11 ages of 65 to 125 years each. So there are 11 ages extending between one avataric advent and the next. The avatar descends in the 11th age. And then, so right now we're in the first age of a new cycle. And here, Baba gives information about how many perfect masters and majubs there are at all times. And even on the next page, he gives specific information about the spiritual hierarchy. There are always 7,000 people in it. And here he says how many there are in the different planes and how many between planes. I won't go over all these details here. In fact, there are some real questions here. Some of this stuff can't be true in the form it's given. This was taken, by the way, from an earlier publication in the Mihir Baba Journal. So a lot of this stuff needs to be sourced. There's some good research that needs to be done with respect to all of this. But the very last item I want to just call your attention to is item number 34. This is by Dr. Ghani again. and I showed it before. It's Tawhid, or the Unitary State of God. It's about 11 or 12 pages, and this is the most important exposition on the relation between Baba's Darshana and Sufism to be found in God Speaks. It's very interesting in many ways, and a lot of the supplement is borrowed on some of the framework that it gives. I'll be mentioning certain things later on. I won't try to go into it right now because it would entail a long discourse on the subject of Sufism, but it's very interesting content. The supplement also has a glossary, which you can see here. This glossary was prepared by Lud Dimphel for the second edition of God Speaks. It was not there in the first. But it gives it, all the terms are defined. You can see in this one on page 282, Abdal, and then it has an S. What S means is the term is derived from Sufism. Or below that, Adhyatma Marga, V. V means the term is derived from Vedanta or related to Vedanta. It's really a very good job. I'm particularly impressed in view of when Lud Dimphel did this back in the 60s. Nowadays we've got the internet and can find sources on these subjects easily, but he didn't have those benefits. So it's an impressive job, and it's one of the most authoritative accounts of some of Mihir Baba's spiritual vocabulary. By the way, I know that I may be seeming to blow my own horn, but I think I do want to say that in the revised 6th edition of Discourses, I did a glossary which used all of this and much more. So I think it's probably the most comprehensive glossary of Mihir Baba's terms that we have so far. Baba used words freely from English, from Islamic Sufi tradition, Persian, and Urdu, and a lot of Persian Urdu words come from Arabic. And Vedanta has a vast heritage going back to Sanskrit and through the various Indic languages. Baba used all of this quite freely. His language, his vocabulary was very rich. And I do believe that in the future, humanity will need to take in all of this vocabulary. Our English vocabulary is too impoverished in these spiritual topics. We need to use all of these words. So this glossary is really a valuable feature of the book. Now, I want to say now something about this chart, chart 11. When you look at it there, it's very intimidating, but I want to give a few keys to how to read it. This was created again by Lud Dimphel. Lud Dimphel was one of the Sufis of Sufism Reoriented, and again, he did an impressive job of it. Fundamentally, and this was sent for Baba's approval. In fact, the information is given right down here in the corner. It's a little bit too small to read right there, but Lud Dimphel sent it for Baba's approval, I think in 1964, and it got approved and got incorporated into the second edition. But the fundamental plan of it is this. It shows the journey from gross consciousness to God realization and all the higher states. And it organizes all the various terms and concepts, English, Sufi, Vedantic, in relation to each other. So you can see on the left, 0 means gross plane, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 means planes. All of this would be the 7th plane of God realization. So it's a hierarchically organized table from that point of view. In this quadrant, in fact, I can expand it. So this is the bottom left. It shows the different kinds of seekers. like you see here, gross sphere, subtle sphere, mental sphere. And it gives the various Sufi and Vedantic terms. The Alam-e-Nasut would be the Sufi term, or the Anabhuvan would be the Vedantic term for the gross sphere. For the subtle sphere, the Alam-e-Malakut, or the Pran-bhuvan. For the mental sphere, the Alam-e-Jabrut, or the Mano-bhuvan. So if you want to sort of start to get a handle on the different terms that get used for these, this is a help. And by the way, this is part of the work that Mihir Baba as Avatar was doing. He was explaining spirituality, but giving some indication of how these great spiritual and mystical traditions should be correlated, because they have lived in their own separate world and haven't talked to each other very much. So, here you have the gross world, and religion is shariat on the gross plane. Tariqat is the Sufi term for the path. Okay, these are the major, I guess I'll have to stop expanding, but these are the major types of spiritually advanced souls. On this side is the path of musts. You see the word musts there? They're God intoxicated. On the right-hand side, you see suluk on the top here. That means the path of saliks, who are not intoxicated but are balanced. And there are two major types of these. On the left, you see the God absorbed, and on the right, you see the God communed, they're called. God communed would be like Raj yogis who go into meditation and experience samadhi states. And God communed are people who are constantly absorbed in God without even knowing it. And as this chart shows, people on the path, on the saluk paths, in the end, they all have to become intoxicated at the third plane, fifth plane, or sixth plane, because to find God, you have to be overpowered and drunk. So this, by the way, comes from the Wayfarers. That's where La Dimple got this. These explanations are all given fully in the Wayfarers. On the upper left, you get a lot of the terms for God-realized persons. In previous 2 or 3 sessions, we talked about majubs, who are God-realized and creation unconscious, of paramhansas, who sometimes have the I am God experience and sometimes the I'm man experience, jivan muktas, who realize God and are conscious of creation, and perfect masters who experience creation and have duty in it. Well, this chart will show you those. Divinely absorbed Majube Kamal, Brahmi Bhut is the Hindu term. That's for God-realized people with no experience of creation. Next above it are the Paramhansas. The divine juncture at the 9th state of God is here. Jivan Muktas are here. A most perfect one. Baba doesn't explain this very much, but he mentions it. These are a certain special type of Jivan Mukta who can give realization to many people. And you see these arrows here on the right-hand side? What this means is that these kinds, the Akmal and the Jivan Mukta, return back down to creation consciousness. You see? That's what that arrow means. Through the universal mind and the universal body. Whereas the Majubs and the Paramhansas really don't. Then there are a lot of other very useful terms if you want to get into these, like the Alam-e Lahut here on the left, the Alam-e Hahut on the left. So I won't try to go into all of these, although I myself am very interested in it. By the way, I have found certain mistakes here and in Dr. Ghani's presentation. I think they reversed the meaning of Lahut and Hahut from what they mean in Sufism. But anyway, there's this table could be the subject of 2 or 3 sessions all by itself. And if you spend time with it, it's really most useful coming to terms with some of these concepts. Now, on the whole right-hand side of the table, in fact, I'll go to, oh no, that's not this one. Yeah, okay, this is the bottom right. These are fundamentally Sufi categories and Sufi concepts that are correlated with Mihir Baba's Darshana. And the columns, the vertical columns, are identified here. Certainties, existences, manifestations, unifications, selves, aspect, power, knowledge, bliss. Now, these are basic Sufi concepts. And so you're going to get them starting the fifth. This bottom layer corresponds to the gross sphere. This middle layer corresponds to the subtle sphere. This layer here corresponds to the mental sphere. Here's the I am God experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And then on the top right-hand corner, this on the very top here would be the state, what corresponds to the experience of perfect masters. And below that would be Jivan Muktas and Paramhansas and Majubs. I know I'm kind of giving this rather quickly. We would have to spend a good bit of time with each of them. But the basic scheme that is being used here is this one. Are we okay? Okay. The basic scheme being used here is this one. The term for it is the 5 presences, and I want to present this quickly also. This is a theme that was developed in the tradition of Ibn Arabi, the great Sufi perfect master, but it is very universal and can be found across a variety of religious spiritual traditions. It's useful to know, and it certainly relates to Baba. So there be 5 presences means whatever you are experiencing the presence of God, but you do so in different ways. So the 5th would be you experience God as the gross sphere. For those of us who are gross conscious, we're actually experiencing God's presence as the gross sphere. That's called the Alame Nasut in Sufism. The subtle sphere, for people on the 1st or 3rd planes, the Alame Malakut would be the name. The mental sphere, the Alame Jabarut is the Sufi name. Then this distinction is very useful. God with attributes and God without attributes. God without attributes and without form exists in pure isolation, unreachable, unknowable, unthinkable, undescribable. That's the reality of God. God with attributes is God who exists in a mode of relationship to his creatures. He's merciful, he's angry, he's just, he's loving. He has all these qualities. And it is through the medium of these qualities that God relates to all of his creatures, people, animals, plants, planets, etc., etc., etc. This is a very basic distinction to be found in most of the great religions. Islam certainly has it. Christianity does. Vedanta definitely, it's Nirgun Brahman versus Sagun Brahman. It's everywhere. So transcendental God without attributes is Nirgun and Nirakar, that is, without attributes and without form. And God as divinity possessed of attributes and form, Sagun and Sakar. The reason I'm mentioning this is that this chart is basically organized along this pattern of these 5 presences. And let me just try to show you. The 5th presence, God on the gross sphere, is this whole row. You see down there? The 4th presence, God is the subtle sphere, is this whole row. God on the mental sphere is this whole row. God as with attributes is this row here. And God, more or less without attributes, is that row there. I'm simplifying, but that might help to try to understand the global organization of this chart. It's quite a splendid chart, and if you really want to study these things, this chart is most helpful. Okay, let's come now to chapter 10 in God Speaks, which is part 10, it's actually called, and it's very short. So that's the supplement. There's much more that can be said about it. I just wanted to show you the menu, right? To actually go over this closely, we would need to spend another 5 or 8 or 10 sessions just on this. And one day, Dr. Ghani's whole book will surely be published, from which these are tidbits. Yeah, it's very, very interesting stuff. But now this is the last chapter of the book, and look at how short it is. And it's so short that I'm actually going to read the whole thing. God cannot be explained, he cannot be argued about, he cannot be theorized, nor can he be discussed and understood. God can only be lived. Nevertheless, all that is said here and explained about God to appease the intellectual convulsions of the mind of man still lacks many more words and further explanations, because the truth is that the reality must be realized, and the divinity of God must be attained and lived. To understand the infinite eternal reality is not the goal of individualized beings in the illusion of creation, because the reality can never be understood. It is only to be realized by conscious experience. Therefore, the goal is to realize the reality and attain the I am God state in human form. Now, there's a Western rhetorical term for this kind of thing that I think applies. The term is a palinode, or a retraction. This is the Avatar's version of it, but a very famous one was by the great medieval poet Chaucer, who wrote all these wonderful stories in poetic form. He's one of the greatest English poets. And at the end he wrote a retraction and say, I repent for having written most of these stories, the ones that go in are sexual or don't conduce to virtue. It's my fault. But anything that's good here is thanks to the mercy of Christ. All the rest I retract. It's a retraction. Okay. This is common at the end of it to sort of take back what you've already said. In a certain way, Baba is doing this because he's saying to understand God is not the goal of life. Well, what has this whole book been about? Trying to understand God. So it's almost, you could say, well, Baba, why did you write the book then? You know, or to put it another way, what is the value of God Speaks then? And this, to begin with, it's a warning not to confuse intellectual understanding with spiritual experience. And that really is a point that has to be emphasized, because priests and yogis and imams and professors and intellectual people constantly make that mistake. They think, because I understand it, I have attained it. But understanding is completely worthless from that point of view. I personally have, a reasonably good understanding of many of Baba's teachings. I'm not even on the first plane. I've never had any spiritual experience at all, zero. So the only purpose of it all is actually to experience these things. This last chapter hammers home that point. Don't think that by understanding this you have done anything. You have to live it and experience it through love. Well, so then let's ask this question. what's the point of reading God Speaks? Does it have any value at all? And there are a lot of Baba lovers who say that it doesn't. It's like all that is explained to appease the intellectual convulsions of the mind of man. Okay, if you're one of these people suffering from intellectual convulsions, then read it. But if you're not suffering from intellectual convulsions, skip it. Okay, there are a lot of people who feel that way. So I just want to talk broadly about this topic. And there are 2 points of view toward the labor of understanding Mihir Baba's Darshana that I want to mention. One, they'll have somebody who will say, books like God Speaks and other discourses of Baba that explain spiritual truth just don't do anything for me. They don't help me in my life for Baba, and I'm not interested. My response to that is, fine, don't read it then. I'm not, follow your own spiritual path. But there's another view that says Baba's discourses have no value. And there I will say, how do you know what use they may have for other people? And what this helps with, what I feel that a book like God Speaks helps with, is to illuminate the mind and the intellect in a way that it is open to the higher truths of God. If somebody says to me, well, you just read God Speaks because you're a prisoner of your intellect. Well, maybe true. I'm not saying it's not. But I would be inclined to say this. Okay, brother, have you stopped your mind? I know my own mind when I wake up. From the moment I wake up, it talks and talks and talks and never stops. Not for 1 second is my mind stopped talking. Isn't that true of you? Don't you have a mind that talks? Aren't you thinking about this and thinking about that and judging this person and judging and wanting this and wanting that? If you are, you've got a mind that's functioning. And the grasp of spiritual truth is one of the great tools that the Avatar has given us. Because if I can understand, no, that thing I'm thinking, that's false, that provides a way of destroying falsehood and opening scope for the admission of spiritual light and love and truth into my life. So these things can have a great value for the life of those who are prompted that way, There's a nice quote of Plato's, which I've quoted before, about beauty. Beauty is the splendor of the truth. Beauty is the splendor of the truth. And I would say, from that point of view, God Speaks is extremely beautiful. You see vistas. If you get to really know it well, Baba told Robert Dreyfus, one of his Western lovers, died a few years ago, read God Speaks until it dances in your veins, right, like that. If you get to really see the inner vision of it, there are vistas and horizons and spectacular sights are there. So for people attracted to it, this is a treasure beyond description. So I would take seriously Baba's admonition. Don't imagine that by understanding this, you have realized it. You have not. You have to walk the spiritual path. But on the other hand, don't disparage it either. We have minds and we have hearts. To bring the mind and heart into harmony, this is one of the great tools that Baba has given. It's not in God Speaks, but in many other places, Baba would talk about the three great paths, as shown in this slide, the three perennial paths. The path of action, karma yoga, the path of knowledge, jnana yoga, and the path of devotion, bhakti yoga. This is a standard idea in Hinduism. The Bhagavad Gita is all about this. And in a Tiffin lecture, which we have this picture of it here, Baba gave the explanation that on the left here, Jnana Yoga, which goes from the gross plane to God realization, the root of it is God's nature as knowledge, Gyan. Remember, God has three natures, knowledge, power, and bliss. That path is, Jnana Yoga is based on God's nature as knowledge. This one, Bhakti, the Bhakti Marg, as you can see at the center, Bhakti means devotion. This is based on God's nature as bliss. And Karma Yoga, the Karma Marg, is based on God's knowledge as power. The three great paths, in other words, have there as their basis the triune nature of God. This is something which seems to be an original revelation by Mihir Baba, as far as I know. It seems to me that when you're really delving into a book like God Speaks, you're focusing more on the knowledge, Jnana Yoga side of things. And this is one of the great paths to God. The other two paths are there too. Some people may not at all be attracted to the knowledge path. They'd prefer the bhakti, bliss path, or karma yoga. And most people, there's kind of a blend of these three. But here's a very nice statement that Baba made about the interrelation between these three paths. Bhakti, or devotion, becomes, now this is what these paths really are when they're pursued properly. Bhakti, or devotion, becomes the expression of truth, means the divine truth, through feeling. The way of knowledge becomes assimilation of that same truth through understanding. And the way of action is seen to be the result of the will being actuated by that very same truth. Isn't that beautiful? So in Bhakti Yoga, you're feeling the truth. In Jnana Yoga, you're using the discriminative understanding as an approach to truth. And in Karma Yoga, you're acting it out. Now, there's no reason why you can't integrate these and use all three of them. But I would submit that a truthful understanding is a great asset on the spiritual path, a tremendous asset. And in that respect, God Speaks makes a tremendous contribution, such as I think the world hasn't had before, actually. It's a new advance on anything that was given previously. Okay, so in this slide, this schematizes the three paths in their relation to the triune nature of God. God's nature as knowledge is connected to the mental sphere and the mental body, and the path related to that is Gyan Marg, or Jnana Yoga, or the knowledge path. God's nature as power is related to the subtle sphere and subtle body, and the path is Karma Yoga. And God's nature as bliss is related to gross sphere and gross body, and it's related to the Bhakti Marga. To say a word more about these paths, what that means is, in a spiritual path, not just indulgence of knowledge, not just indulgence of power, not just indulgence of bliss, but using these as a means of renunciation and self-sacrifice to God, okay? Gyan Marg, knowledge yoga, means discrimination where you chop the head off of falsehood. You repudiate false ideas so that the truth can emerge before your vision in all splendor. Karma Marg means using power in the form of your action selflessly, so that you're not acting for your own benefit, but you're acting in the service of God. Thus, you act in a way where you renounce the fruit of action. You perform an action, but renounce the fruit of it. You see, so it's using power, but not for yourself. Bhakti yoga, or the bhakti marg, is focused on bliss. But when you love, whose bliss are you concerned about? Not your own. You're concerned about the happiness of your beloved. So it's a continuous service. Is Baba happy? Or let's suppose I'm a man, I'm in love with a woman. I bring her flowers, and is she happy? Is she pleased? You're always focused on the happy, because it's a yoga, it's a path, it's a self-sacrifice. So in bhakti, which becomes love, you're concerned with the love of your beloved. All three of these are forms of renunciation of self-interest and of egotism for the sake of the highest truth. Baba's Darshana accommodates all three of these, I think. And this aspect that we find in God Speaks is more on the Gyan side of things. Most of his books are, like the discourses and so forth. But they are very susceptible to being brought into use in the course of a spiritual life in his service. Now, the very last topic I want to bring up is going back to the very beginning of the book, the dedication, which we have here. This is right at the start. To the universe, the illusion that sustains the reality. This dedication has elicited a great deal of commentary, and doubtless it will continue to do so for 700 years, because it seems wrong. What do you mean, the illusion that sustains the reality? Isn't the illusion dependent on the reality? Isn't it the reality that sustains the illusion? What happened? Did Baba get his head all screwed up and put it the wrong way around? So there have been many different points of view on this. But here are some of my own thoughts. I'm thinking that Baba is using sustains, the word sustains, in a certain way. You can say, I sustained the experience. It was a great challenge, but I sustained it. I bore it. I endured it. I carried it. I upheld it. In this sense, the illusion, although it is non-existent, although it is nothing, is nonetheless so great that it can serve as the platform through which Jivatmas come to the experience of the I am God state. It is only through that the soul gets there. In the beginning, God didn't know himself. It was through this vast journey through creation and through illusion that the soul came to the state of transcending illusion and knowing itself as God. So in that sense, the illusion upholds the experience of God. It sustains it. It's not that God needs it, but it serves it. It provides a platform by means of which people can arrive at the I am God state experience. So that's the thought that I have about that dedication. And with that, I do believe we've come to the end of this series of God Speaks. Oh, and let me just say this one last thing about the word Darshana, Mihir Baba's Darshana. The reason that I've used that is that the English word philosophy is wretched. It's a wretched word. Darshana it's a standard Indian word for this. It means not just to have the darshan of a master, but it's a system of philosophy together with a spiritual path of approach to that reality. And I think that's a much better way of talking about this great gift Baba has given to us through books like God Speaks and Discourses and Infinite Intelligence, and Creation and Its Causes, about to be published, will be in this category too. It's not just something for the intellectual understanding. It's a revealed vision of it. You can get a glimpse of it. The door can sort of pop open a little bit, and you can begin to see things. God Speaks is a magnificent opportunity for anyone who wants to pursue this further and further. And I hope that these 14 sessions may have been of some help in beginning to try to understand what Baba has been doing through this course of this book. Thank you very much for those of you who have wanted to tune in. And let's close with an Avatar Mihir Baba Ki Jai.